Hello and welcome to the Pirates Fan Forum here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm your host Gary Morgan. With me, as always, is my good friend Jim Stamm. How you doing, brother?
Doing good, man. Let's not focus exactly on the Pirates today. I think we all need a tiny break from that. What do you think?
We'll circle back to it, man. I mean, dude, I'm super excited tonight because while we won't be able to avoid how the team is performing currently, we'll finish the show with all that sad stuff. When we probably won't be able to avoid pretending that we're fashionistas breaking down the City Connect uniforms and all that jazz.
No,
We're also going to spend most of this episode talking about the upcoming MLB draft. I called this episode the MLB Draft Extravaganza, Jim.
that was Gary. That was fancy. You spent all of 8 seconds on that one, but go ahead.
Right. And to help us, I'm going to bring in a couple special guests. First, returning to the show is our friend and host of the Bucs in the Basement podcast, my writing partner at InsideTheBucsBasement.com, and longtime friend Craig Toth. Craig, happy to have you with us today, bro, on your birthday.
Yeah, man, it's been a busy day, as you see, as I just jumped on a couple minutes late. I actually got my son a gift. I got him a bike with training wheels, and so I lost track of time there for a second. And yeah, happy to be on back here again talking some Pirates baseball.
All right, good stuff. And
Happy
Craig takes on the
birthday.
Oh,
Yes.
thanks, Jim. Appreciate it, man.
How old are you now? What, 36, 35,
I
30?
think I'm just going to be eternally 39, but no, I'm 44 years old today.
All right.
I'm
All right.
It's
Well,
not
Craig
44
takes on
years
the
young.
draft for our site, so he's much more talented in this regard than I am. I felt we needed his help on this episode a little bit, so I appreciate having him along. But the star of the show today is somebody that we've brought in from Locked On LSU, of course, on the Locked On Network, and 102.5 The Game, Caroline Fenton. Caroline, I can't imagine why the Pirates fans would want to pick somebody's brain who's been watching LSU baseball all year, but we're going to do it anyway.
Totally random. Totally random.
Just decided to talk about LSU today, to switch things up. But I do have to say, from a St. Louis Cardinals fan, from St. Louis, born and raised in St. Louis, I don't want to hear a single thing out of your mouths about how bad your
Cut.
team is
Cut.
playing. Cry me a river. Oh, man.
I mean, it's not something you're used to experiencing, so I'll let you process it, and we won't
It
give
is
you
not.
any flack for it today.
And I've never experienced a Cardinal season like this, which plays into how bad the Cardinals are this year and also how spoiled of a baseball fan I've been my entire life. So I think we're about due. We're about due
Makes
for a
total
season like
sense.
this.
It's very Penguins-esque for Pittsburgh fans or Steeler fans, really.
Yeah.
Like, we don't respond well to losing. So yeah, we get it on that aspect. We're used to it with the Pirates, but
Fun little
So-
switch up.
Let's
yeah.
start with a basic question. We'll let you kind of get to know our audience a little bit,
Yeah.
and they'll learn about you just from answering this. First question I have, Caroline: what has it been like covering a team that very likely has the top two picks in the upcoming MLB draft playing, I mean, in the College World Series? I'm not even bringing up Ty Floyd, who could go in the second or third.
Surreal is probably the best way that I could put it. I've been covering LSU baseball a very long time, and I've seen and I've covered a whole lot of really good teams. I covered that 2017 team that went to the College World Series final, but no team has really kind of had a feel like this ever since the very beginning. I mean, even going into this season, LSU was preseason the number one team in the country, number one transfer portal class, and number one recruiting class. I went into this season saying it's a championship or bust. And I think that those are incredibly high expectations. College baseball is hard. It's hard to win in Omaha. It's hard to get to Omaha. So to say championship or bust really kind of sounds ridiculous. But those are the expectations for this team. When you have the number 1 and number 2 overall pick in this year's draft, when you have other players that are going to go fairly high in this year's draft, when you've got players that are going high in next year's draft, those have been the expectations. So it has been surreal. It has been fun. And I've been trying to remind myself and all LSU fans out there, like, this is special. This is something that we don't get very often. Don't take this for granted. Take every opportunity that you get to see Paul Skeens, Dylan Cruz, Ty Floyd in an LSU uniform, because we've got something special going on this season in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, you've also picked up a whole heck of a lot of Pittsburgh fans because, I have seen LSU baseball all over my timeline for about 6 months now, it feels like. I'll ask you one more here, and then I'll let one of my colleagues here ask you one. When Paul Skeens is throwing like 120 plus pitches in a College World Series game, you're rooting for him not only in the World Series and what he does for your program, you're rooting for his future too, right? So what does that do to his draft stock? I mean, the usage scares Major League Scouts off, I think, sometimes. I mean, in this case, is it going to endear them though because he's just so dominating?
And that's something that is very fair to bring up, and something, and we've talked about, on Thursday, LSU's going to be playing Wake Forest, and it's win in advance of the College World Series final, lose and you go home. It could pitch Paul Skeens on Thursday night. They could. I mean, it's Major League rest, but it's only 5 days after throwing 120 pitches. Major League pitchers don't throw 120 pitches. So that's kind of been the philosophical debate and argument of what is really fair to do to Paul Skeens. But this has been a conversation and an argument that we've been having since the beginning of the season. At some point, it was, Paul Skeens can't throw 120 pitches every single Friday until he does it every single Friday. And he pitches at a very, very high level every single week. So the concern, I think, is fair. But I think that he has enough of a sample size, at least coming from the LSU side of things, of feeling confident that he can go out there and pitch at a high level. I think we've seen that week over week that he can do that. He can continue to pitch at a high level week over week, even after he's thrown 110, 115, 120 pitches. From the Major League Scout side of things, I don't know if it scares them in terms of longevity or if it proves, hey, you've got a guy here who's like 6'6", 240, 250. His body can kind of take the beating a little bit. And if he can perform at a high level with this pitch count, what can he do at a lower pitch count when he's going 4, 5, 6 innings as a Major League starter? So it's an interesting philosophy to look at through both perspectives as an LSU fan and as a potential scout. Yeah,
it makes sense what you say, but Craig, like, we watched this drama kind of play out with Kumar Rocker and Leiter, right?
Yeah.
Just a couple years ago, and I don't know, did they hurt Kumar Rocker letting him throw as much as they let him throw? I think the debate's there, and Leiter, really, he's kind of faltered in the minors a little bit here. So it's always risky picking a pitcher. What are your thoughts here on Skeens and really what any of these top level pitchers have to do to win the College World Series?
Well, Gary, for me, I mean, it's impressive to what he has done. And the season isn't as long. And that's one thing that gets to me is it isn't as long as a Major League Baseball season. So you can maybe compact some of that. But I mean, it's a college manager's job. His job is to win, the College World Series, especially, at a prestigious university like, LSU. It's what he is brought in there to do. So I think there is that balance. So, I mean, it kind of does scare me. And I usually say, bat over arm, for that reason. But I don't know. This one is kind of getting to me, but I want to see, how he is able to continue to perform. If he was, showing some velocity drops, I mean, that's the things that we saw even with Rocker and Leiter towards the end of their campaigns. We
saw them start to falter a little bit.
There was a little bit. I mean, in the beginning, they were pitching, 100 and some pitches. They were pitching, for 12, 13, 15 strikeouts and going crazy. And then, towards the end, we saw some of their workload go down. Hasn't gone down. And it's nothing against, Leiter. I mean, Leiter doesn't have the same body build.
Yeah, he's
Rocker was a little bit more of, I would call, a horse within a rotation, but it's also, the types of pitches they throw, the way that they throw, the mechanics. I mean, every single pitcher is different, but for me, I haven't seen him slow down yet. Is there still a danger? There's a danger with every pitcher. I mean, there's a danger with, I hate to say it, like a guy like Rich Hill who throws 69 miles an hour, having something on his elbow, something, some sort of torque that he's doing wrong.
Well, if he pitches for 19 years, I'd be pretty happy. So I'm going to do something really bad as a host. I'm going to ignore my co-host and take a quick break. And then we come back, he's going to talk.
At DK Pittsburgh Sports, we take pride in coverage that connects our city's fans to their favorite teams. Now, that connection's stronger than ever. Introducing our all-new state-of-the-art app. Find expert inside reporting and original podcasts. Check live box scores. Track the latest stats. Chat it up with our community of thousands of fans, all in one place. The new app from DK Pittsburgh Sports. Coverage that connects.
All right, we're back to the Pirates Fan Forum here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Go ahead and subscribe. Give us all the comments. Do the Apple stuff that you can do to rate us. Help the nice guys out. We say it every week. Thank you so much. So, Jim,
yeah.
I was listening to Caroline's show just this morning, and she was talking about even in the last game, they were almost could they maybe bring Skeens in the bullpen? I mean, that's the kind of thought process it takes to get through a College World Series. What does that do for you when you're considering drafting a guy like that? And then when you're done answering this, the floor is yours. Ask Caroline the next question.
Okay. Well, let me say this. Like it reminds me of kind of when you get to elimination games or deciding series games in Major League Baseball, where it is kind of all hands on deck. You are pitching on short rest. You are doing those things. The difference here is of course, we as Pirate fans, we don't want to order something and get it and it's damaged when we open the box, right? Or
we wait until we've had him a couple years before that happens.
Yeah. We want to start off differently this time. But no, so, and Craig, I want to touch on something because you brought up a really good point, which is the season's not as long. Okay, so it's a compacted season compared to Major League Baseball, and so we don't have that to worry about. And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Do you happen, or Gary, do you happen to remember when we had Garrett Cole? How heavily was he used? Because if I look at a Garrett Cole type guy and his size and his ability to stay healthy, and he is still, that guy all these years later. I don't remember if he had a big, huge workload. I imagine he had somewhat of one, but do either of you remember?
I think back then, Jim, there was like a different philosophy. It was built around innings as opposed to pitches. So I think, and he also had a pretty good teammate over there in Trevor Bauer, who they were kind of like bouncing each other off, innings and stuff like that. So I think that's where it would come down with me. Is I don't think pitch counts have ever been like really this high. But at that point in time, I think they were monitoring innings as opposed to monitoring pitches.
Okay. Yeah, it just made me think of it because, we had a guy we took high and he was a horse and he was a big guy. And I will say that, the more I have looked at this, and I kind of referenced this before we started, I've been Cruz all along. But and this is why I love the fact that we have someone like Caroline on here, is because the more I've looked into it, the more confused I am about it. because Skeens, I think we're talking about, look, Cruz is a fantastic player. But when we talk about the ceiling with Skeens and what he could be, we're talking ace material here. And quite frankly, some of the comps I've seen with Cruz has been more of like the Freddie Freeman type or Andrew McCutchen type. great players. So then you have to just balance the risk, right? And so, I mean, I guess I'll just go right to you, Caroline. Like when you look at this and you're closer to this, what do you think? What are people around you saying? I mean, where are you at?
What I have heard and what my personal philosophy is, whoever you take, you're giving Washington a gift. Whether you take Skeens, you're giving Washington Dylan Cruz. Whether you take Dylan Cruz, you're giving Washington Paul Skeens. I think it just depends on the prospects that are currently in your organization and the philosophy of baseball that you want to play. Because I think that both Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz, they have the quote unquote intangibles, to be incredibly corny. They both make this team feel more confident. When Skeens is on the mound, LSU just plays better. They do. They play more comfortable. They play more confident. They play with more swagger. When you get a big at bat from Dylan Cruz, it's almost like it unlocks something else within this team. Like Dylan Cruz had a 2-run bomb against Tennessee to finish out that game on Tuesday night, and then on Wednesday, LSU came out swinging at the plate. It felt like they each just like charged the rest of this team. So they kind of have that effect, and I do think that that is something that will carry in to the major league wherever they end up. I really don't think that there is a bad decision here. I think that Paul Skeens is about as ready of a pitching prospect as there is in college baseball right now, and maybe as there has been in college baseball in the last few years. And what you're getting from Dylan Cruz is just runs. He's an on bat or on base getter. He is a run getter. I mean, they're both seem like very sure things to me. And that's not an LSU bias. It's really just looking at it through the major league perspective. Can't go wrong. It's mostly just philosophy.
Our friend Pittsburgh sports all the time here. Before we get into this draft talk, I have one question. What is this phenomenon in baseball called runs? Never heard of such a thing. Our team's been really struggling, and I don't expect you to know
Poor
that right
Pirates
now.
fans.
Yeah.
You poor Pirates fans. I have a hard time being too sympathetic this year, but I understand. I get it. I know.
So, I mean, Paul Skeens, I think, is probably the number 2. I can't see having a 1-1 and passing up on Cruz. I just can't. I think he's generational. And if I think they're even, to me, it kind of splits off with the pitching scare. I'm just afraid of a pitcher. If the Pirates were to pass on him, I know we would assume Washington would snap that right up.
Mhm.
They've had a lot of problems with pitching. None probably bigger than Strasburg, to be honest. I mean, and look at the situation they're in right now. I think they've gotten 4 innings out of him on his new contract. He'll probably never pitch again if you really, really think about what's going on with his situation. They got a World Series out of him.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's worth it.
Yeah, you going to complain? No. I mean, if you draft somebody and they take you to the promised land, you're happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in theory, I could see a couple of these top teams on the board being a little bit afraid of the pitching. The Nats are one that just recently got burned. The Tigers sure as hell have.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen, I think, 3 top starters go down for them, Mize and a couple other guys. And the Rangers just picked up Leiter and Rocker, and, they're pretty set on pitching as well. I don't know.
Let me jump in here because I saw something really interesting. And it was, and I'll just read it word for word. It says, even if Skeens required, say, 1 Tommy John surgery in the first 6 years of club control as Strasburg did, he could still be worth the pick. Strasburg amassed 17 WAR, a 70-41 record, and a 3.17 ERA in those first 6+ years of club control. So, if you think he is that, and even if you have the Tommy John, maybe it's not as big of a risk as we think. He would have to have, and we're much more familiar with this name than Caroline will be, but like Mark Pryor-esque arm problems.
Yeah.
Cubs, and that's who he's being compared to right now. Strasburg and Pryor is kind of like the best pitching prospects of the last decades now. So, I don't. The risk is in the arm, right? Obviously, and it's a bigger risk. But that did catch my attention. That maybe it's a little too much worrying about that if you believe he is, just this ace of ace type guys. Just food for thought for everybody.
Yeah, good point. Let's throw something back at Caroline because we talk about how great these players are right now. But Dylan Cruz has been doing this for 3 years.
Yeah.
It's really hard to pass up that kind of an evidence bank when you're looking at a draft pick, right? And here he is, he's poised to be 1-1. Well, in 3 years of college baseball, he's hit 378 with a 1.187 OPS. I don't even care if he's using 3 wooden bats. I don't care who he's facing. That's crazy. Crazy.
It's pretty insane. And just for those who don't know the history of these two, they each came into this year in a completely different space. Dylan Cruz has been a career LSU Tiger. Like you said, he's been at LSU for 3 years. He's been consistent for those 3 years. He has been a marquee player for each of those 3 years, even going back to his freshman season. Paul Skeens, on the other hand, he transferred into LSU this season. He spent his first 2 years of college ball at Air Force. So if you're worried about the usage at LSU, you'd be even more worried to hear that he caught and hit at Air Force in those 2 years.
He's a really good athlete is what I found out about the guy. Like,
insane.
Surprisingly, like the fact that he doesn't have to pick up a bat this year and he can hit. So like embarrassment of riches, but yeah, like the
Seriously.
guy, he's the size of Ben Roethlisberger. And probably that kind of an athlete, younger Ben, not older, immobile
not
Ben.
last few
But
years.
like
Ben.
he's not just some big guy that just that can hit 100. So
Yeah,
Craig,
he's
do you got
crazy.
any questions for Caroline in particular?
Well, I have 2 questions, but I also will throw up some stats at the end of this about a particular player who kind of matches Dylan Cruz's stats and has not developed, at least to this point in time, as a particularly great 1-1. But there was some stuff coming out towards the end of the season where Dylan Cruz's numbers started to go down a little bit. Wyatt Langford actually pushed above him in OPS, and I wanted to get this from you. I know you're covering LSU fan, but a lot of the people on Twitter are they're just going to push their what they're thinking is that. So everybody said, well, he's being pitched around. He's not seeing good pitches. He's seeing a lot of off-speed pitches, stuff biting the corners. And I just want to know, like, was it just a little bit of fatigue towards the end of the season? Because he's obviously come on in the College World Series.
Yeah.
Or were they legitimately pitching around him?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think there was an element of fatigue for this entire team. Because if you look at LSU's season overall as a whole, they were playing much better in the first 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season than they were the final 3 or 4 weeks of the season. And Jay Johnson, LSU's head baseball coach, even mentioned once they got to the SEC tournament that all of the outside elements of school and taking tests and social life, now that is behind them, and having a week, they had a few days in between the final series against Georgia and then the SEC tournament to just breathe, to just be, not play baseball for 3 or 4 days. So the fact that Jay Johnson brought that up to me feels like there was an element of fatigue there, not just for Dylan Cruz, but really honestly for the team as a whole. I mean, it can be a grind of a season when you're playing 4 games a week and you're also a student athlete. I think the second part of it too was LSU's pitching in the last few weeks of the season were not very good. So all, opposing teams needed to do was just not pitch to Dylan Cruz, and they could put up enough runs because the pitching that they were facing opposing teams, it wasn't very good. So I do think that there's a little bit of an element to all of that. And to put that in perspective too, because I remember talking about this and talking about it on the podcast of all of these LSU fans on Twitter, on the internet saying, oh my gosh, what's going on with Cruz? He's in a total, cold streak. still hitting like 440. So we also have to put that into context of like a cold day at the plate for Dylan Cruz is still probably a much better day than anybody else. But I do think that there was a little bit of everything going on there at the end of the year. And we've seen Dylan Cruz and really the offense as a whole take a step forward in the last 2 days in Omaha.
Well, you mentioned something earlier, Caroline. I want to dive into this role for a little bit. You mentioned intangibles.
Mhm.
I want to know, from what you've seen and heard, are they both the guy, or is one the guy? And I mean, like, from like mentality, just command of the room, leader, that type of stuff. Because, you know, when you are going to be picked where you're going to be picked, I think those things are going to matter. So
Totally.
what is the consensus there with that?
That's a good question, and it's a fun question. And I would say I do really believe that they are both the guy for different reasons. When Paul Skeens is on the mound, he's the guy. He is the one that gets everyone rallied around him. Everyone feels that difference in the room. Paul Skeens isn't on the mound every single night. So I would say it's Paul Skeens when he's playing, and when he's not, it is Dylan Cruz. But I've never seen any player unlock a certain just like next level of energy like I have with either of those two pitchers. So I would say both to a certain extent. And I would say both of them also have a certain level of maturity that I think you need to have once you get to the next level. Dylan Cruz has been a very highly touted prospect ever since he was in middle school. He's been prepped and ready to be on a big stage for quite a long time. Paul Skeens, he grew up in a military family. He went to the Air Force Academy for 2 years. He has a certain level of confidence and maturity in him that I don't think you see a lot of 20, 21, 22-year-old players have. So I think just both of them, although they have different backgrounds, they each have backgrounds that I think lend themselves to being mature, to being confident, and really to being leaders, spoken and sometimes silent leaders. I would say Dylan Cruz is probably the more boisterous, the louder one in the locker room, that before a game, he's probably getting everyone hyped up more so than Paul Skeens. But they just both they elevate everyone else around them.
Yeah, that doesn't help me because I'm trying to sleep at night. I want to know who the right pick is.
I wish I could help you.
I'm looking for, the chinks in the armor here, the kinks in the armor, and I don't know where. I'm trying to find it, and
I'm liking them both right now. I was dead set on Cruz, and this whole conversation has made me confused. So
I will say a little, tally in Paul Skeens' corner. Dylan Cruz has been the guy at LSU for 3 years. This is Paul Skeens' first season at LSU, and only throughout a couple of weeks, that's all it really took, maybe even 1 week in SEC play, for every single LSU fan to notice Paul Skeens and for everyone to just be so enthralled with what Paul Skeens can do. I mean, how can you not look at his stats? Maybe that's a little tally in Paul Skeens' corner. It didn't take him very long to be absolutely beloved in Baton Rouge.
I have one final question for you, Caroline, but I'm going to ask everybody on this call one question before we get to it. And that is, when you have been the man at a program for 3 years, what's it like going to an MLB team where you likely aren't going to be for a minute?
Mm-hmm.
Craig, how do prospects that are coming in that have always been the best adjust to that?
Well, I mean, you could see with certain players like an Adley Rushman, he's the man already again. Do you know what I mean? Right. Certain personalities take over, and if they're playing well enough, people will follow them. Some people have that leadership quality, that leadership mentality. But I mean, I kind of get what you're saying though, Gary, because when you walk into, I mean, most of these guys, whoever's drafted here is more than likely at most is going to walk into a high A Greensboro Grasshoppers, where they're all fighting to get to Altoona.
At least.
So, I mean, they're not going to be the man just
Can you imagine Cruz hitting at Greensboro?
Oh my God.
Caroline, you're not familiar with our minor league affiliation system, so I don't expect you to get this, but after this call, I want you to go and Google the Greensboro Grasshoppers Stadium.
I'm sure it is glamorous.
Oh no.
It's smaller than Great American Small Park in
I was gonna
Cincinnati.
say,
I mean, it's
if
tiny.
by glamorous you mean very tiny, and
Yeah, the right
home
field
runs
wall
just...
is right behind the second baseman almost.
Like every other single A park, probably in America. Yeah,
Well, our
overgrown
single A
grass
park-
in the outfield. Yeah.
Our single A park, they play major league spring training games in, so it's okay. But our high A, it's a cow pasture with a really, really short right porch. It's awful. I would love that affiliate to go away and go back to West Virginia. But regardless, it is what it is. I think he could probably do some real damage there. So my last question for you is, when one of your beloved LSU Tigers is taken by this hell of a club, the Pittsburgh Pirates, are you going to denounce the Cardinals and follow the Pirates? Because
Not even for a second.
Oh,
Not
that's
even
cool.
for a
I
second.
respect it.
I am a
respect it
diehard
too.
LSU fan. I love LSU with my whole entire heart, but I was a Cardinals fan first.
I respect it. I really do. That's how I kind of figured you would probably end. So before I let you go and give all the plugs away and everything, any other questions from you two gentlemen for Caroline?
Do I put her on the spot?
She's here. Put her on the spot.
I
yeah.
do.
Give it to me.
You're not going to stump her. I listened to plenty of her shows. She
Thank
got her.
you.
She knows what she's talking about.
If you were the Pirates, who are you taking?
It's a really good question. And I'm really glad that this is not my job. I would take Paul Skeens. I think I would. And it's incredibly close. I don't think there's a wrong answer, just in terms of ability, and not just ability that I've seen at the college level, but just the things that the sheer raw talent. I think that he could be ready in a year. I really do. I think a single season in the minors, and I think he would be ready. And he's just, I just adore Paul Skeens. Dylan Cruz, elite talent, generational talent. I would have to go Skeens.
I have seen some quotes that people said that Skeens can pitch right now in the majors.
I wouldn't be surprised.
In the bullpen, I saw, yeah.
Yeah. So, when you're talking about a team like the Pirates, yeah. So, okay, that's good. I had no clue. Hey, you did a good job, because I had no clue what you were going to say.
I really didn't have a clue what I was going to say either, honestly.
So, Craig, what about you?
I think that's the best question you can ask, and I'm just going to leave her alone after that one. That was a tough one. I don't know if I have an answer, but I still don't think I would be as confident in my answer as she was.
Well, let's make sure everybody follows Caroline Fenton 1 on Twitter. She'll tell you other places to follow her if you like. And Locked On LSU on the Locked On Network. Good show. I enjoy it. I listen to a lot of these different localized shows for some of these colleges, especially like if Pitt's about to play them or whatever. So I've been familiar with her work for a minute. So good stuff. Carolyn, where else can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton 1. Follow along Locked On LSU, your preferred podcast platform, or on YouTube. Or you can also follow along my Nashville radio show, 102.5 The Game. We stream on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook Live. You can also find us on the Game Nashville app.
See, she's all more professional than we are and stuff. I mean, she straight up embarrassed us today on this show with knowledge.
Just what I was thinking was embarrassing. Embarrassing how professional she is, Gary. We got to up our game.
Thank you.
She's
Thank
great.
You. Y'all
man.
are great. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and we'll definitely do this again when you have the top pick next year, and we're still picking it.
And hopefully the year after that. Hopefully the year after that. Hopefully it's not my Cardinals with the top overall pick, but who knows?
Not with the lottery. They're not that lucky. Nobody rewards the Bible Belt that easily. So, all right, Caroline, thank you so much. And everybody else, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk some Buccos that I'm not going to put Caroline through.
At DK Pittsburgh Sports, we take pride in coverage that connects our city's fans to their favorite teams. Now, that connection's stronger than ever. Introducing our all-new state-of-the-art app. Find expert inside reporting and original podcasts. Check live box scores. Track the latest stats. Chat it up with our community of thousands of fans, all in one place. The new app from DK Pittsburgh Sports. Coverage that connects.
All right, we're back to the Pirates Fan Forum here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. My goodness, did the room just get a lot uglier? It's just me, Craig, and Jim now.
Let's go straight to audio.
But
Yeah.
it's time to talk a little bit more about our beloved Buccos, because the draft is cool and all, and I thought that was an awesome segment. I love
That was
learning
great.
about
That
those.
was great.
Love learning about
Great.
players, like from people that have actually been watching them. It's one thing to watch all these highlights on Twitter that people throw up, and it's one thing to tune in for a game here and there. It's another thing to follow a team and really understand the evolution of a player like that. She almost sold me on Skeens. I mean, that's
You're like,
probably where we
almost.
should start, boys. We
Man.
should probably start by just going, did that change your mind at all? I mean, I was 100% Cruz, and now I'm kind of like, well, maybe.
Craig, go ahead. You first.
Well, for me, I mean, once you invited me on here, Gary, and I saw what the topic was going to be, discussion was going to be, I just started looking back into, previous like picks and everything. And for me, I've probably gone from like, I don't know, even prior to this, I probably was like 90% Cruz, 10% Skeens. And then maybe built myself up to like 70-30. I was just because of how else are the Pirates going to acquire a pitcher that has the potential to be, a legit ace. Like, I know Mitch Keller is our ace. He maybe has the ceiling of being a league-wide ace, but we're talking about like a guy that could be like a top 5 pitcher in Major League Baseball. Like that's where the comparisons are at.
You're talking
Right.
a guy that can win you a World Series. Let's be honest, that type of guy. Like, so.
And I see teams get bats. Like, I mean, Garrett Mitchell for the Brewers, they got him like in the later teens. I mean, Zach Veen was gotten. He's playing pretty well out. There's Neto. I mean, I look at players where it's like you can get bats, but can you always get, a pitcher like this? I don't know. So that's where I started going that direction.
We're watching a team right now in the midst of a 9-game losing streak, and they can't score to save their lives. But I've heard for literally the entire time I've been watching the Pirates how easy it is to get bats. Well, where the hell are they then? I mean, to me, it's very difficult for me to pass up somebody I feel might be generational that can play 6 or 7 times a week for me, as opposed to one. That's what
the Tigers thought with Torkelson.
That said,
and Torkelson tore up the college ranks just the same way that Dylan Cruz did. He had about a 346 batting average, 54 home runs, 1,100 OPS for his career at ASU. Not a slouch of a program. And the guy is batting, what is he, 213 in the major leagues right now? Negative like 1.4 WAR. I mean, I could say a bat is guaranteed. I think it has a better chance to be guaranteed.
Yeah.
But that's why when somebody says who's a hitter that's, been picked 1-1 and has performed well, you probably go Adley Rutschman, and then you go back, I don't know, pretty far to find another guy who's contributed more than, maybe 12, 13 WAR for his entire career.
Yeah, it's a tough decision. I mean,
I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm not saying I wouldn't pick Cruz. I'm just making us think here.
Dude, this is about trying to change minds, man. Like, we're a couple weeks out. This is the time to do that. Raw reaction time, boys. As we're recording here, just Reynolds is going to the IL 10 days, retroactive to the 20th. So he's already kind of been on it technically. I would imagine that means that if they made it retro, it's probably not all that super serious, but who knows? It could be. Cody Bolton's coming up. How much worse can it get, really? I mean, 9 games is bad enough, but boy, it's got all the makings of being worse than that heading to Miami.
Miami's used to playing close games and win a lot of them, so they're no slouch. I just I'm shocked that those 9 games they lost them all. You couldn't imagine a worse road trip and then coming home and still losing all divisional games. They can't get out of their own way with the health of anybody right now. So
Yeah.
This may not be the end of it. And they weren't particularly deep or talented to begin with. So you can only absorb so much.
I totally agree. And Craig, losing Reynolds is going to hurt, but let's not pretend like that's what's going to kill this team. They've been dying slowly for a minute here. I think you've probably read on our site that I'm getting very, very last stringy with Haynes. Okay. I just you know from talking to me that I would have flat out fired him mid-season last year.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be a shock to you that I'm over it. But I just think they need to try something just to even have somebody different talk to the players. Maybe there's just a disconnect there.
Yes,
Because
I think
the plan maybe doesn't even have to change mid-season, but this dude is not fixing mechanical errors, right? I mean, you don't have the whole team slump that badly for this long. Nobody really gets fixed and it has its stick without having a bad communicator.
I mean, but he was. I mean, I'm just going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. But my first thing is that I think this is Derek Shelton's philosophy. I think that they found somebody who could voice this to the players. So if it's a communication issue, then that would be the change. Derek Shelton's a hitting coach. There was a similar philosophy, and they kept Eckstein around as to finding your zone and picking your pitches and making people throw stuff. And it's not like Andy Haynes's philosophy is much different, and none of those have been successful for very long. I mean, but in saying that, he was able to communicate to, I think it was, Kevin Newman, even though he didn't stick around, as to what he needed to do to be successful. And he was successful in short doses, but Kevin wasn't able to do that long term. I mean, he instituted something and had been talking with Brian Hayes about something that, would help his approach to the plate. That helped him for about a week. But anybody that's watched Brian Hayes knows that
he's back to it.
He's kind of right back to where he was. So to me, I could see it being, I don't know if there's a disconnect between his communication, if there's a disconnect between the message. At that point in time, Shelton would want him gone too. But I mean, I was listening to Day On talk the other day, and he was saying that, Shelton said something like, we, need to fix it. So to me, it's like, I've always seen at least the hitting side of things as an armature, I guess, of Shelton's philosophy more than the pitching side. So I don't know. My thing is like Shelton needs to go in there and just basically say, okay, guys, we tried this. Let's just try being aggressive. It may not work, but maybe at least it's something different.
I think for me, it's the rigidity. It's just, this is the way we want to approach this at. It doesn't really matter if you're a strike throwing pitcher that's against us. This is where I want this strike to be when I swing. I'm not swinging unless I get it. And some of these guys, they're just not wired to hit with 2 strikes. They're not wired to hit with 1 strike. You don't take that first one and put them behind the 8 ball because they don't recover. That's just the way some of them are. I think that's the way some hitters are. That's where I just don't like the communication aspect of it. I'm a big fan of John Nunnally. I've really liked what he's done in AAA. I think it's a different league. I'm not pretending like they're facing the same pitching up here, Jim. But in AAA, he's getting some results with some of these top prospects. And if they're all preaching the same sermon, maybe he just delivers it better. Is that not worth a shot? I mean, is a year and a half of utter futility enough? It's the worst, historically awful offense they've ever had last year. in franchise history. So,
Gary, I mean, look, that's what makes this so tough is like, how married are they to this, right? Like at this point, and they're just waiting for better talent to come along and execute it. I don't know. I don't know if it's communication. I find it hard to believe that it's just Andy Haynes has this idea and he's trying to do it. I think this is, everyone's on board with it. He's doing what they're asking him to do. But sometimes you just need to make a change too. I mean, at some point you are culpable. Your name is on it, regardless. So I do think there's still an issue of talent. And I think that guys have been pressed into playing more, and as that happens, then they tend to get overexposed and exposed. And I just think we're seeing a lot of that right now, but the bottom has fallen out again.
Yeah.
And
the players
so,
are always going to take their fair share of responsibility. They own that. It's their careers. And if they don't like what's being told to them, or they don't like the batting plan and they're not pushing back against it, then it's on them. It is. At the end of the day, it's their career. So push back against it if it isn't working. I don't give them like a pass here. I don't go like, oh, Andy Haynes stinks so bad that he's making these great players awful. But when I'm seeing a guy struggle with the same thing for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it's not something like I just can't hit sliders outside. I'm talking like never being prepared for them to attack you with high heat. Never being prepared for them to come at you with a backdoor slider. When it's going to happen. I can sit there and call the pitch sequencing watching Rodolfo Castro hit left-handed. You know what's coming. They do it every single time.
A lot of third called strikes looking.
Boy. Because they're just not aggressive. Ever. And like Craig, I think the thing that frustrates me the most is when I'm watching them, they have a runner at third with less than 2 outs. The guy that comes up next, walking should be the last thing that crosses his mind. It should, I mean, if you happen to walk, it should be because they just threw you 4 wide ones, like real wide ones. But aside from that, you want a guy up there with the mentality of let me hit the first thing that it looks like I could get in the air.
Yeah, and I think that it's
situational.
I think at some points in time there, I mean, at least I fell into, Connor Joe's control of the zone and Andrew McCutchen to a degree, because, there would be that stuff out there with the scorecards and, some of these pitches would be bad and it'd be like, well, that shouldn't be the count anyway. But then it kind of comes down to me it's like, okay, well, but that is the count. Like at some point in time, like your approach, like throughout the at bat, you have to adjust. It shouldn't be, well, I know that's not a strike, so I'm not going to swing at it if it's being called a strike. But then, I mean, you see, I think Jason DeLay, Connor Joe, a few other guys I saw, it's like that last like pitch is like right down the middle, fastball. It's like a 3-2 count. They have to throw a strike. Like,
yeah,
at least, some of the time, a couple of the players should, take the bat off their shoulder and like you said, Gary, in that it's situational hitting. I think Jim was going to say it's situational. Like when situations change, you have to adjust.
And on the flip side, forget which game it was because we've lost a lot. So I don't know which loss it was, but I know they were down at least 2 runs in the ninth. First 2 guys up. 2 outs on 2 pitches.
Yep.
You're down 2 runs in the ninth. You would think if there's any time that you may be looking to get on base and get something started and maybe hunt a walk, you might want to do it there.
But you didn't.
And so, but they did. It was Connor Joe and somebody else. And look, let me be the first to say, we all know this. Baseball is super hard. So we're being very, very particular here. But this is situational baseball. And out of all the numbers and all the stats and all the analytics we have, we can't see that you need to get some runners on base and you need to start, adjusting to the situation.
One would think we just watched the Cubs beat us 6 times doing exactly that. They weren't hitting home runs most of the time. They're making contact.
Yeah.
Weak contact many times. And good things happen when you make contact, especially when you have runners in scoring position.
And that goes
When it
back to
only
Gary.
takes a ground ball sometimes to make the run happen.
And that's whenever you mention the rigidness of it to me, that I'm
Yep.
like, okay, I'll even buy the rigidness of it if you're just going to say, nope, this is it. It's going to work. We're going to push through this. We're going to get some better talent as things go. It's going to work organizationally.
Yeah,
But when you don't change, even fine. If you believe that, okay, it's it's your baby. But then when you can't even change that when it matters in a game and you need to adjust, then I'm out.
I'm sorry, man. Like when I see a player like Ji-Wan Bae taking a couple strikes and then swinging for the fences, that he doesn't have much of a hope of getting to. Like, let's be honest. I know he hit a home run early that was pretty dramatic, and they played it on AT&T 3 billion times because it was the only happy moment for however long there. They score a run, great, he hit a home run, but like that dude's got to cork everything in his body to hit a ball out. I do not want him doing that with 2 strikes. I don't. Just even on the occasion he runs into one, I want him to slap it the other way. Like, why are these players not playing like they are? They're not playing like who they are.
Yeah, he has the speed that, I mean, it's just pretty much should be make contact, because even if it's hit to the second baseman, there's a chance if it's bobbled with his speed, he can get on base, so.
Yeah.
And it's playing. I mean, I'm just seeing because I watch a lot of minor league baseball. I mean, I'm seeing different approaches at the plate for like players like Canaan Smith and Jigba, for Cal Mitchell, who have like strikeout rates that they've never had. And it's because, I mean, this isn't just an approach we're talking about, like an approach like with the major league team. This is something that, goes down through, just like with, Oscar Marine. It's the same thing. It goes down throughout the system. And I know people are going to say, like, Henry Davis only has 1 hit or whatever in his time up here as the time of this recording. And people will say, well, Andy Haynes ruined him. Well, it's like, well, Andy Haynes has had his finger on him since he's been, in Greensboro. So it's not that simple.
Right. And I guess that's the thing. I don't like to demonize a coach necessarily. I don't like to always say it's all on this guy. It's not. It really is about the players as well. But to me, at the major league level in particular, the application has become so rigid of this. Doesn't matter if you're leading off. Doesn't matter if you're batting cleanup. Doesn't matter if you're the 9th hitter in the order. It's all the same. Go up there, try to work a count, even if you've got Wainwright, who just is going to rain strikes into the zone over and over and over again. You're still going to take 2 pitches every time. It's a death wish. And as soon as you get scouted and they know what you're doing, you do anything in Major League Baseball consistently, you're only going to get away with it for a couple weeks. I mean, that's the moral of the story. Change direction because you have to. It's like if you watch the Steelers come out on that first Sunday against San Francisco and run the ball into the line of scrimmage 20 times out of the first 22 plays, and San Francisco's got the line stacked 9 deep, you're going to be calling for Canada's head just in case you quit at some point. But like, you're going to be calling for Canada's head right away because they know what's coming and you can't do it. What are you doing? What's all we're saying about baseball here? You have to change your tactics in order to not get scouted to the point where you're just defeatable, no matter what you do. It's crazy to watch.
And it is that's the thing too, like in theory, working the count, taking pitches, it's all really good. Make the pitcher work harder, get guys on base, make up for some of your deficiencies and all that. But then the flip side to that is we all know what the statistics are when you get down in the count.
Yeah.
And you get to 0-1 counts and 0-2 counts. I loved that on the Apple podcast, or on the Apple game the other day when they were showing, the on base percentage probability at 1-1, and then they would show 1-2. It would drop from like 36% down to 17%. Like,
my eyes might have glazed over because they were showing stats from the show. So
oh well, no, but like when what I'm saying is like, you talk about death sentences. That's where things, like, as a hitter, boy, it gets really tough. You better know what you're doing on a 1-2 count, on a 2-2 count, 0-2. My God. So yeah, it's tough.
Let's get into this toughie. Why won't they put Henry at his natural position? Why do they waste an at-bat with Hedges by allowing Henry to DH? This is from Mark Lancaster. The simple answer, the Pirates' answer, is they really value the defensive side of the game when it comes to catching. And they value it so much that they don't care that Austin Hedges can't hit. I think eventually here we're going to get to the point where not playing a kid back there is kind of moot. It's not like we're winning without it. It's not like the pitching staff is being elite without it. But Craig, you're the former catcher here, so much like Jim gets all sensitive when we talk about first baseman, I'm gonna defer to you here and just make sure that you get a chance to defend Hedges if you want. I don't know that I'd recommend it, but
no. And here's the thing: is it's not even a defense of Hedges. It's a recognition of how much it takes to be a major league catcher. And I mean, you're asking Henry to adjust not only to coming up from AA to then a quick stint in AAA to now facing major league pitching, and the amount of time and the amount of research and energy and everything that would be spent on, catching him up to speed, not only on preparation to be a major league catcher, but I mean, any scout I've talked to, anybody outside the organization that I've talked to, because of course inside the organization they're not going to say Henry's lacking at this. I mean, they'll say he needs more reps, but I mean, people will say like his defense just isn't there yet. And this is like blocking, pass balls. This is game calling. This is framing. This is receiving. This is everything. And I mean, yes, would he probably have a better batting average than Austin Hedges if he was behind the plate every single day? Yes. But I think it would be at the demise of a bat that could be at least something that you don't want to mess with as a kid's coming up through the system. And I know people once again will point back to Adley Rutschman. Well, I mean, Adley Rutschman had more innings catched. He wasn't injured. Adley Rutschman went to a college program that focused more on catching than Henry Davis did. I had somebody on my show who talked to Dalton Rushing, who was the backup catcher for Henry Davis at Louisville, and basically said in Louisville they didn't even like make them frame, do anything, block, call games. It was all on the coach. So he hasn't had that preparation. So you could say he was a high-level college catcher. But, I mean, he was just basically a body behind the plate, and that may be something that happens at some point in time to a degree, with the automated balls and strike system coming in. But until then, I mean, Henry's up here because his bat was too much to ignore, to the, faults of his, work behind the plate.
And I think, Jim, you can speak to that as well, but I'm going to throw in another caveat for you because Andy's going to come at some point too. I mean, the bat has come around a little bit recently. I can't imagine that a team that can't hit is going to keep another prospect down for all that long that is actually hitting. If he comes up here, it almost has to be a watershed moment for the catching position where they finally realize one of these guys got to go. They got to start working in somebody, right?
I would think so, because they're going to have to start doing it at some point. They need to get their feet wet behind the plate. I don't know if you could go into something. The beauty of, at least at first, with Davis and Endy, is that they can play other positions, or you can DH them or whatever, and you can kind of rotate them in. And you can't. Now's the time to do that. I will say overall, I do think that people don't understand how difficult catching is at that level. I do think, like, we've gotten to the point where no one wants to consider the fact that, aside from like quarterback in the NFL, catching may be the second most difficult thing to do in sports. And you are essentially the quarterback back there behind the plate.
And rookies do it every year. So, I mean, in honest sincerity, if we're going to make that comp, we have to say that as well.
True, but there's going to be a price to pay for that usually too, unless you are just fantastic at it from the get-go and you can't avoid doing it or letting a guy sit a little bit. So, I mean, there's a little bit into that as well. But Hedges, at some point, you've got to start making some room for the other guys. He's so bad at the plate. But like you said, Gary, they value the defense. They value what he brings to the pitching staff. And I don't look, the overriding thing is that the Pirates, on social media, they don't know what they're doing. They're doing this for X, Y, and Z reasons and everything other than that. What would be the reason now to not be doing it if they really didn't value it that much?
The reason the cynic would say, because they're paying Austin Hedges $5 million and don't want to just waste the money. Now, do I think that really matters because they're wasting all kinds of money on Yarlin Garcia and,
Yeah.
Carlos Santana, $8 million.
Hannah. So,
Although his defense has been good too.
I don't think it holds water, Jim, but I'm throwing something out there as far as an excuse you would hear. So my question to both of you then would be, okay, I can get behind that. I'm not going to happily get behind it. I'm done watching Hedges. I just don't care anymore. And to be honest with you, I don't think he's good enough defensively for me to really bat an eyelash about it. I really don't. I'm seeing far too much. I don't think he controls the running game. To me, if you're going to have zero bat, you better do nothing wrong defensively. You better control that running game. You better never have a catcher interference. You better not commit an error. You sure as hell better hit people where you're supposed to and be where you're supposed to be to receive the ball and make great tags and do everything that you're supposed to do. When you're not doing that, I'm sorry. I'm done. Pirates aren't. I get
fair.
that. I'll accept it. I'll say what you guys say. Yes, I get hard position. I certainly know all that. But at what point do we run into, well, now we've kicked the can down the road so far that come spring of 2024, we still don't know if one of these guys can be the starting catcher.
Yeah.
To me, I can't think of anything that would be dumber.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. I think the ideal situation is you get Endy up and you start mixing them in. Now, whether that means you keep Hedges or delay, honestly, I don't know that I care. And then you just start working them into that process and getting them those reps, so we aren't having this exact conversation in spring training next year.
Craig, are you worried about that at all? Do you think we're still going to be probably looking at another veteran?
I mean, it definitely worries me because, I mean, when you at a position that's so important, I mean, you want to have at least somewhat of an answer. I think when Endy comes up, I think that's probably when delay goes away and he gets optioned down to to AAA, and I think that Endy will get some reps. Endy defensively is ahead of Davis, but his bat isn't at this point in time in the season. Like you said, he's been hitting better. But I was just looking. I mean, in the month of June, he still has an OPS below 700, a WRC plus of like 66. I mean, he's having good games, but I mean, he hit a double yesterday, and I mean, of course, Pirates Twitter lit up, and people are asking, well, how's his pitch framing? And I'm like, well, actually, his pitch framing is pretty good, but he's also got a 66 WRC plus on the season and an OPS below 700 in AAA. So I don't know how many guys that can turn the switch and all of a sudden come up here and their OPS goes back to what it was, or even near what it was last year, 700, 800. So you might get better defense, but his hitting might be bad too. So, I mean, that's where
in a way, don't we kind of go back to the earlier point that was made about why maybe it's better to not have Davis catching right now because of all the other things that he has to think about. We talked about like how hard it is just for him to prepare to hit. Well, isn't Endy doing all of that right now in AAA, learning how to catch? So maybe does he get a little bit of slack for that? And you've been watching prospects long enough, Craig. You know those overall numbers don't matter. It's the last 2 weeks and a hot stretch is all that it takes. Like they're not waiting for his OPS to hit 850. They're waiting for it to be 850 for a couple weeks.
Yeah. And I think once he does that, but the funny part is he hasn't done that. Not even for a single week.
Right.
Has he done that yet? So, and I think that, he plays first base well enough. He plays, catcher well enough. And I think that the person that's going to be sacrificed in this the most is probably going to be McCutchen. And fans may have to deal with that because I think that Endy and Henry take some of the DH spots there. And then the other person is the right field is Connor Joe, and he hasn't been playing that well. But you do have to see number one first if the bats will play within Major League, and then decide if they can be a catcher. But I've not seen too many teams that can run two guys like this where they have, they're catching some games, they're playing right field some games, somebody's playing first base some games. The Diamondbacks try to do that with Dalton Varsho, and
they wound up trading him because all they did is mess around with him for 3 years.
Yeah, for 3 years. So that's what I'm worried about is, I mean, at some point in time, that's where my main concern is. You end up, messing with a guy a little bit too much, and then you're 3 years down the road.
That's my concern too, Craig, because I brought up spring, but really I'm thinking a little bit longer term. My fear is you have these two guys right here on the doorstep that we're calling catchers, and you swing and miss on both because you're pissing around with both of them. I'd rather pick one now, say you're the catcher.
Yeah.
Let's move forward. You're going to be wherever else.
I actually agree with that, Gary. I would not screw around too much longer with just who's going to be who. I think there's some value in that, both organizationally and to the player. Baseball's hard enough. You got enough.
Or maybe
to
you
worry
take
about.
this year to figure that out.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Not today. We don't have to have that answer. Yeah. But yeah, like, guys, look, this is, next year and the year after that, can't be doing this stuff anymore.
Right. But we do got to end the show. So speaking of having an answer, it's time. Which one are we picking? I'm going to go with Cruz. I'm going back to Cruz now that I've had here a few minutes to sit. Craig?
Honestly, to tell you the truth, at this point in time, I'm probably going Skeens because I don't know how we can get a pitcher like that anywhere else.
Jim?
I was like Craig. Before this started, I was about 80-20, 90-10 Cruz. I'm leaning Skeens, and it's because I think in order to I want to be all in on winning it all. And I think you do that with a Skeens type guy. I don't know that you ever get there with Dylan Cruz as good as he might be.
Hey, all fair. And I think that's the best we can do is just take our shot, right? So, and like Caroline said, you're not going to go wrong with either of them, really. She feels pretty confident about both of them, and I tend to agree with that. I actually think they are both very, very qualified here. For me, it's real hard to ignore 3 years of good at any level of anything you do, and that just feels to me like rare evidence that I'm going to take advantage of and pick my dude.
Hey,
So
it's a good problem to have. It's better than not knowing who to take, and
Right.
because there's no clear cut. You got
Hey,
two.
so follow Craig on Twitter at Bucs Basement, and check out everything that he and I write on InsideTheBucsBasement.com. We always have new Pirates stuff there constantly. Check it out. This show's audio will drop on Saturday morning, and I don't think we have anything else because we went pretty long.
We
So let's
did.
let Ben take it away.